Let me know if you don't hear me, and I'll say I'll give it them.
Okay, here. How's this? Okay, very good. We'll use this. Well, thank you very much for that nice welcome, and thank you for coming out. It is true, we were there last night. What a difference between two states. Last night we were in New York, and sometimes they have to sort of twist my arm a little bit to go into New York City, but we did on John Stewart show. Interestingly enough, there were some supporters there that wanted to have a little rally afterwards. It was pretty amazing. You think only limited government, free market people who live outside of Washington or outside of New York. It's outside of Washington D.C. as well. But it was really a big rally. It was very encouraging. Everything's been encouraging lately. The meetings have been going very well. The organization is going very well. And of course, what I'm most interested in is the message that we've been talking about. I've personally been talking about it for a lot of years, but it seems like it's really catching on, and there's a couple of good reasons for that, I believe. The fact that I've been in and out of Congress for a good many years, but always involved in education, economic education, and really talking about the same thing for many, many years. But it just seems like, even compared to 4 years ago when I ran in 07 and 08, there's a big difference. And I don't think it's because my message is different. Most people give me credit for the same message all along, and that stays the same. The country has changed, the world has changed, attitudes have changed, and people are starting to recognize that we have some big problems. And one of the biggest ones is just too much spending and too much debt, and we've got to get control of it. And I think that's what people are anxious to talk about, and that's been the thing that I've been talking about for many, many years. But I also have been emphasizing certain things in the economy, because over the last 10, 20 years, I've talked about the business cycle and why we have bubbles and why we have recessions. And sometimes that sounds esoteric. Why does anybody want to hear a politician talk about business cycle theory? Well, there's a good reason. Because if you understand why there are bubbles and artificial booms, then you understand why there has to be a correction. The correction is when you have recessions and depressions, and that's when people lose their jobs. So it's very, very important that we understand exactly how these cycles work. Many times, and still today, there are many people around this country and even around the world that say that the reason you have booms and busts is it's inherent in capitalism. It's inherent in free markets. It's these conditions that are natural. You just have to deal with them. And there are theories in the past that have been, well, in a recession, people don't spend as much money. So if we just tell them to spend more money, everything is going to be okay. But it's actually the wrong thing to do, because if you have a recession and people are losing their jobs and they're worried about the future, and they don't have any money in the bank, they can't spend more money. What if they have 5 credit cards and they don't have any more, can't get any more credit cards? You're telling them to spend more money. Well, most people can understand that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But what happens if the government believes that's the answer? That's been one of our big problems. We spend too much money. Our debt is too big. We print too much money, and we regulate too much. So we get into the crisis, which we should have been able to anticipate. So far, what have we done? We have inflated, and we continue to tax, we continue to regulate, and then we still continue to mess around and pretend that all we need to do is print money. So the real culprit in the business cycle isn't the free market. The real culprit is the Federal Reserve System, and that's why we have to address the Federal Reserve. In the 1930s, when we had a depression, they blended on free markets and the gold standard. I'll tell you what, just printing money and pretending it's wealth is not a very good solution. It's a bigger part of the problem. Up until the 1930s, although we had many of these cycles before for various mismanagement of the economy and the monetary system, generally we saw that the government wasn't supposed to solve all the problems and spend more money and print more money. And in 1921, that's what we did. We just ignored it, and we had a bad depression because it was it was a consequence of the printing a lot of money and spending a lot of money, running up a lot of debt in World War I. The correction came and lasted a year and was over. Nobody hardly even remembers about it or studies about it. But in the Depression, we changed our attitude. The government had to do something, and that's politicians like that. I'll take care of it, you know, and solve all the problems. Of course, the politician gets credit for the good times too, because they're spending money and they're borrowing money, they're printing money, and it doesn't really cost anything. And so politicians, quite frequently, get the credit for this. And but in the 1930s, the attitude changed, and they said, no, not only the government doesn't cause the problems, the government can get us out of the problems. We just need to spend a lot more money and borrow a lot more money. And guess what? The Depression really lasted from the 1929 up until after the war, about 1947 is when we really finally got out of the Depression. And yeah, you have to learn that. We're doing the same thing over again. We're doing what Japan did, and they've been in the doldrums for 20 years. They don't allow the correction to come. So if we want jobs and economic growth, you have to get rid of the mistakes. And that's what happens when you have a Federal Reserve that messes around with interest rates and causes people to build too many houses and mismanage things. And you have to eventually eliminate the debt and the burden. Because if you as an individual want economic growth, and all you do is you owe money and you're not earning enough to pay your bills, you have to do something about it. You can't keep growing because you can't borrow any more money. So what an individual has to do is they have to cut back. Maybe if they have 2 or 3 cars, maybe they should have 1 instead of 2 houses, maybe 1 house. If they're living beyond their means, they have to come and live within their means and start paying down the debt. When the debt is paid down, then you have growth again and you can improve your economy, your personal economy. And that is what a country has to do. But that is also very difficult because of the politics of it all, because people want to be taken care of. So many of our problems I see come from some very basic fundamentals, and that has to do with what freedom is all about. Our society and our government and our country had a better understanding of what freedom was all about than probably any other country, and we did rather well. Far from perfect, but at least there was a principle of private property and free markets and profits and these sort of things that really gave us a great prosperity. But we've been slipping for a long time because we have depended on the size and growth of government. And even in this recent time, although most people date our severe problems now from 2008, this country hasn't had any good job growth for over 10 years. Really the beginning of our current problem occurred with the NASDAQ bubble bursting. That was in the year 2000. So we've been in the doldrums. Everybody knows that manufacturing jobs have gone overseas, and it isn't that they just don't like us anymore. I mean, American businessmen, they'd love it if they could have build plants here, but we can't be competitive with the regulations, the taxation, the labor rates, the monetary system, and this great burden. And so they either have to go bankrupt or go overseas. And so as much as it would be nice to blame somebody else, we have to look to ourselves on why people leave. And right now, business people have like $1.5 trillion sitting overseas. They don't bring it back home to invest here, because as soon as they bring it back, they get hit with a big tax. And then they know what the taxation is. They don't know what kind of problems they're going to have with conforming to the Obama medical care. Sounds like a great thing. Everybody gets free medical care, but business people are frightened about that. They know that they can't afford it. So as long as those conditions last, it's going to be very difficult to invite businesses back into our country. That has to be done, and it is the understanding of the marketplace. But to understand economics, we also have to understand personal liberty. I work on the assumption that, as was indicated by Jefferson on down, that our rights do not come from government. Our rights come from our Creator. Our life and our liberty come from our Creator, and that's where it starts. But it should follow that if you have a right to your life, and all life is precious, and you have a right to liberty, that means you have a right to do what you want with your life, And you should be, if you have incentives and you want to work hard and make some money, you're going to have the right to keep your money. I mean, that to me would be the logical thing. And the founders understood that. That's why they didn't invent this notion of the income tax. That came later on when they decided in 1913, along with the Federal Reserve, that we would have the income tax in order for government to grow. The reason why I dislike the income tax is it's a basic principle that is deeply flawed. The idea that the government can say, well, okay, you made $10,000 and you have to pay a certain percent to the government. That means, well, the government tells you what percent you can keep. But the basic assumption is everything you earn belongs to the government, and they give you permission on how much you can keep. And that is deeply flawed, because then there's always the conditions and deductions. It's complex code and nobody can figure it out. And then we wonder why we get, pretty upset about the whole mess that we have in Washington. So we need a basic understanding about rights. We have to have a basic understanding of how the free market works, how important property rights are. We have to understand why bureaucracies don't work. We have 100 and some thousand bureaucrats in Washington policing us, and they carry guns. We weren't supposed to have a federal police force. And this is astounding that we tolerate so much. Just think of what we tolerate at our airports with TSA agents. No probable cause, but boy, they treat us like we're terrorists. And the assumption is that we are a potential terrorist and that they can do with us what they want. And I just think we have lack of respect for this basic principle of individual liberty. Now, the big question, though, is if we need to cut back and shrink the size of the government, how do we do it? And where do we start? I mean, it's just a huge problem. So far in Washington, I hate to discourage you, but so far in Washington, there is no serious understanding or any attempt to cut anything. Have you ever noticed that? Yeah. I mean, but you hear all the time, okay, we have this super Congress. Congress doesn't know what to do and they don't do anything, so we're going to have a super Congress of 12 people and they're going to tell us about some cuts. They're not cuts. They're talking about cutting $1.2 trillion out of the budget in the next 10 years, and it's only cuts out of proposed increases. No cuts whatsoever. Now, if you were worried about your budget, what would you have to do? You'd have to cut right away. This year, you'd have to cut back, and you would be scrimping and saving, but not in Washington. There's no real effort. So my proposal starts with priorities. Where would you cut? Well, the first place I won't start would be on those that we have taught to be dependent on government. Now, there's a lot of those programs I don't like. I don't think they should be started. But we have conditioned a lot of people to become very dependent on checks coming from the government. I think of the elderly and the children and the sick people. And for us to say this is where we cut and balance the budget, no way. That's not going to happen. But it does feed on itself. We have to address it. Today, we have 45 million people getting food stamps. It's growing exponentially. And the thing of it is, what can you do? People don't have jobs, they're hungry. So we're so dependent. It grows like this. What about unemployment insurance? Should we cut the unemployment insurance? And people say, well, maybe if they didn't get the insurance, they'd work harder and take any job they could get. Then again, they say, well, you're cruel and heartless. You can't start on that. So I find that there's an easier place to start cutting. I think that we should work our way out of it. We should be concerned about taking care of us here at home. But I am sick and tired of all the spending overseas in the things do I think that we should cut all of foreign aid. On principle, we shouldn't have any foreign aid. If you want to send foreign aid, you can send it to anybody you want, anytime you want, no restrictions. But as far as taking money from you and sending it someplace else, I argue that foreign aid is taking money from poor people in a rich country and giving it to rich people in a poor country. That's true. Even if you cut out all the foreign aid, believe me, balance the budget. It would be billions. That used to be a lot of money, but now, we're talking trillions. But I think where we really have to change our attitude and change policy, it isn't a budgetary matter. We have to change our policy and attitude about entitlements. We have to change our attitude about foreign policy. And this is why I say that the amount of money that we spend on our militarism around the world has to be questioned. And I also argue the case that we will have a stronger national defense if we do less overseas and start bringing our troops home and take care of ourselves here in this country. We're actually engaged in 6 military operations around the world. When you start adding up Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan and Somalia and now in Libya. But right now, even in Libya, it is done so carelessly and casually that the president doesn't even come to the Congress anymore. Doesn't get even an announcement or some token approval. I'm pretty old-fashioned on this. I think if any president that ever wants to go to war, he ought to go to the Congress and to the people and say, look, our security is threatened. If we need to go to war, we ought to declare the war and fight it and get it over with instead of allowing our presidents to go to war at will. That's what we have to stop. And the other thing, the way we go to war, not only does the president ignore the Congress, the proper procedures here, we go to war under the auspices of NATO and the United Nations. I mean, that is not the way it was meant to be. The founders advised us, stay out of entangling alliances. That to me is an entangling alliance, and we shouldn't be doing it that way. And I actually have taken the position for many, many years that we'd be a lot better off if we weren't even in the United Nations. We pay the largest amount of any nation, but we don't get more votes. They can gang up on us when they want to, but we have to pay all the bills. But the issue of the foreign policy and engagement, the military engagement, that's where a lot of money is being spent. They say the budget is like $600 billion, $700 billion for the military, but when you add up everything else, what the CIA does in the State Department and all these other things, it's about $1.3 trillion. So it is big. But I separate the two ideas of defense spending. Everything is DOD, defense spending. You can't cut defense, because then you're un-American, you don't like the troops, and you're not patriotic. So you can't cut defense. But I don't want to cut defense, but I do want to cut the military, because a lot of the military is what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. Build weapons for the sake of weapons, to help arms profiteering and this sort of thing. So that we do not need. Now, I have argued the case, and I've been challenged about being less than supportive of the troops. I happen to know a little bit about the troops because I was one of them for about 5 years in a very tough period in our history during the 1960s. But the one thing that indicates to me that the troops do not find my position offensive in any way. Because if you look at the donations coming from active military personnel, I get more donations than all the other candidates put together. That should tell us something, that they're not as anxious to go to war as some people think. And I got to thinking, well, that's exactly the way it was in 1965 when they were escalating in Vietnam. And I thought, well, I was in between active duty and going into the reserves, and I was in my medical training. I'll tell you what, I was not very happy when they were escalating at that time. So, but think of our troops, what they've been through, the guard units and the reservists, and how many trips they've made over there, and the buddies that they use, and the casualties. We've lost 8,500 Americans already, 40,000 severe injuries, hundreds of thousands now applying for veterans benefits. This is going to go on for decades and decades, and it's not going to stop. In fact, it's being expanded. They're talking about going into 2 more countries. There are people now willing to say that maybe the Iranians might be a military power someday in the future, so we got to go to war against them now. I don't think that makes any sense whatsoever. We ought to change our foreign policy. We ought to have a strong national defense. We ought to defend our Constitution, and we ought to mind our own business.
Yeah.
That would be a place I think it'd be much easier to cut than dealing with our problems here at home. But it would not be easy. You do need to cut some a lot of spending here at home too. So if you had to start with department, they asked me which agency I want to cut. I said, why don't we talk about departments that we want to cut? Why couldn't we? Why do you feel a real need to have the Department of Education in Washington D.C.?
No.
The Department of Education to save many millions and millions of dollars, billions of dollars on the Department of Education. The people in the states and the community should have the ability and the wisdom to run their own schools. We don't get better schools because we spend more money on schools. But I tell you, the best example of this is Washington, D.C. We do have the legal responsibility to monitor D.C. because it's a federal city. And they get $17,000 per student. And they have the worst situation. The education is bad. They have more drugs and violence than probably any other place. And they're always having trouble. And they come to the Congress and they say, you know, we're having a tough time. Just give us more money. But I'll bet you there's not very many. I bet there's no city in this state, in Iowa, that's getting anything close to $17,000 per student. Then you think about, well, what about people who go to private school and homeschool? Homeschoolers, I know a few, and they don't spend that kind of money on their kids, and they get a pretty darn good education. So we don't need to be spending that money, but we need to change our attitude about the role of government. That is the biggest thing. I don't think it is just budgetary. We as a people have to ask ourselves, what should the role of government be? And the founders asked that question. The colonists, when they decided the role of the king is what they did not like, so they wanted to have a new system where the role of government was different. I think the number one purpose of the role of government is to protect liberty. I think that is what we should be doing. If we understand that, we would have a foreign policy that would be quite different. We wouldn't be, the policemen of the world and going in the nation building. It would protect our civil liberties. It would protect our right to pick and choose our churches, our educational activities, as well as your personal activities and the personal needs, and you make your decisions. But everybody has to be responsible. When you do something that is irresponsible, you have to be responsible to yourself, and you can't rely on somebody else and go to the government and say, I did something wrong, now you have to take care of me. And also in economics, I mean, if we understand true freedom in the free market, we have a free market system. We wouldn't be allowing our government to counterfeit the money. You can't counterfeit money. Why do we let the government counterfeit the money? It's dishonest. And this whole system is designed, they say it's designed for the safety net, to take care of people who are having trouble. And there's a lot of that goes on, but it doesn't work. And the best example of that is the housing bubble. It was there, it was designed, well-intentioned people, that we need to get, everybody has to have a house, which is a great idea if you earn it and take care of it and treat it like your property. But to give it to people artificially who don't qualify doesn't work very well. So what did the Fed do? They print a lot of money, create a lot of credit, so it was out there, you didn't have to wait for savings. And then we had a Community Reinvestment Act that says you have to do this, you have to make houses available, and then you tell the banks if you don't make the loans, you're going to get in trouble because you're discriminating and not giving loans to people who don't qualify. So they did all that, and people seemed to think it was working pretty well. 20 years ago, 15 years ago, the houses were going up and the prices were going up. It was wonderful. It was a cash machine, a cash cow. The price of the house would go up, and then they'd borrow more money. It looked like a perpetual wealth coming in. So the people who weren't warned about this, and hey, no, this is artificial. This is a bubble. There's a mistake. There's going to be a correction, and warned about it. So what happened? The bubble burst, and the people who were really big time making money, know some people benefit by getting a house. The big guys who were involved in the mortgages and the derivatives and the trading, and they were making billions, and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and the corruption that existed there, they finally go bust. And when they go bust, they yell and scream, "Come help us! We got to be bailed out, or we'll have a depression." They would have. Those people who were speculating would have. So what happened? So people in Washington, both the Congress and the Federal Reserve, they go and bail out all these guys. They bail out the banks and all the people who've been making these billions and billions of dollars. So the bailout occurred, and guess what? We, the taxpayer, ended up owning these. The Federal Reserve bought over $1 trillion of these derivatives, these bad mortgages, because nobody else wanted them. And they printed the money, which means that you get the inflation for it. But what happened to the dream of the American home? The middle class people lost their jobs. And now even today's report on housing is down again. And so the people lost those houses. So this selling point that government can take care of everybody, and that people will buy into this and say, yes, let the government take care of me. It's wonderful. I'll vote for that person. It's all coming to an end. It's all ending. This is not a recession. This is facing the fact that we cannot continue with this status quo, this attitude that we can keep printing money and borrowing and spending, and everything is going to work its way out. We're already, I say it started in 2000, others admit it started in 2008, but this is lingering and lingering and lingering, and therefore we have to have the discipline system. It's different from what we have, but it's not brand new. What I'm talking about is what made America great. It meant that we believed in ourselves, we understood what liberty meant, we understood property rights, we understood sound money, we understood contract law, and all of a sudden, that was what we gave up on that. So we lost our confidence, and now we're seeing the consequence of government intervention. Intervention in our personal lives. We have no real privacy. Just look at what the TSA does to us. We don't have foreign policy that makes any sense. We're totally broke, and we have an economy in shambles. So I'm not inventing anything new. It's a refinement, because the understanding of the free market and the monetary system is much more refined than it was 100, 200 years ago. It's just that we haven't yet had a chance in recent years to try it out. But that is what I think has to be done. We have to have more confidence that we were at one time on the right track. We're not on the right track now. We're seeing the consequence of excessive spending and borrowing, and this is a time that we have to change things. And this is what my goal is to change the direction of the country, and you have to change people's ideas. We have to convince the American people it's in their best interest to opt for freedom rather than dependency, and we'll all be better off for it. So those are my goals. I thank you very much for coming out, and I appreciate you. Thank you.